From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today has been provided by the following. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont. Online at wvhtf.org. Connecting West Virginia families and businesses through high-speed internet services. Learn more about connecting at frontier.com.
At the Legislature today, road construction is always a hot topic at the session. Today, lawmakers in the Senate learned about a successful program that has improved West Virginia's infrastructure. And we'll continue our discussion about children in poverty tonight on the Legislature Today. Good evening, I'm Beth Voorhees. With members of House leadership taking part in the negotiations of Senate Bill 359, it's been understood that the current incarnation of the education bill might just be enough to get it past the House of Delegates by the end of the week. There was movement on the bill today, and Dave Mistich joins us with the latest. Dave?
Sure. Beth, the House Education Committee met at 2 this afternoon in a session that lasted just over 2 hours before deciding to send the bill as is to the House floor. The committee's attorney took over a half hour to explain the bill and noted some of the changes that came about during the negotiations in the Senate. Committee members asked a slew of questions of counsel relating to everything from the school calendar being increased to 180 days to college career readiness for students. State Superintendent of Schools Dr. James Ferris and Board of Education President Wade Linger also answered questions from the committee. At one point, Linger was asked about a provision in the bill that removes the salary cap on the state superintendent position. He said the board currently pays Ferris $170,000 per year, $5,000 less than the current cap, and not to worry about the board signing blank checks. Linger also took questions about a provision that removes the requirement of a Master's of Educational Administration for the hiring of a state superintendent. The current version of the bill would require a master's degree on any subject. In the end, though, the committee unanimously approved the bill as it came to them and reported it to the House floor in time for the 5 p.m. session. However, it's difficult not to notice how quickly the bill is moving through the House, as it just passed the Senate on Monday. That's because members of House leadership took part in negotiations of the bill while it was being refined in the Senate. House Education Committee Chair Delegate Mary Poling explained the part she played in those discussions while the bill was still in the Senate.
My role was to just sit in on the discussions. The discussions also did include the employee representatives, and my role was to sit in on the discussions, know what the Senate agreed to do with the groups, and to make sure I understood and clarified any of those positions as they negotiated.
House Education Minority Vice Chair Amanda Pasden said she wasn't directly involved in the negotiations, yet Chairwoman Poling took her input and passed it along. Pasden also made note of a few Senate amendments to the bill and said she believes the omission of Teach for America and the increased standards for hiring teachers will inevitably trickle down to student achievement.
Well, I think we got a good negotiated, balanced bill. It's a huge step in the right direction. We didn't address everything that we would like to have seen addressed, but of course it's impossible to do that. The education system in West Virginia is just over-regulated, and we had to get the mechanics out of the way before we could really address some of the other parts of student achievement addressed in the audit. And this bill was designed to really get those mechanics out of the way so we could begin to really address the meat of student achievement.
As far as anyone left questioning the direct effects on student achievement, Speaker Thompson said there's always room in the future to make additional reforms. But he also said that the negotiations with the Senate allowed for a bill that still gets the job done.
People always say bills don't go far enough or bills go too far. You always have that. I mean, I think this bill is a product of a lot of hard work. I think this bill does address many of the things contained in the education audit, and it's a bill that had all the stakeholders present, so we could do the right thing and not have unintended consequences. So I think it's a very good product, but there will always be some people that say we should have done more. If you do, there's always other bills, other legislation that can be proposed. So just because if it doesn't have everything in it that someone would want, they can always propose other legislation.
While all eyes have been on Senate Bill 359 as it's made its way to the House, another education-related bill was up for vote today during the morning floor session. It was House Bill 2861, which relates to continued enrollment of at-risk students in public school. Delegate Josh Stowers of Kanawha County explained the bill.
This bill allows dual enrollment of a discouraged and defeated learner in the public school and a private alternative program school if the county superintendent approves and the alternative program meets certain required conditions, including IEPs, to prepare for the student transition back into the public school.
After questions from various Republican members about the criteria for selecting students for alternative programs, House Bill 2861 passed 97-0. For the Legislature Today, I'm Dave Mistich in the House of Delegates.
West Virginia has saved millions of dollars thanks to projects that were undertaken through Design Build. It's a pilot program that helps build infrastructure. It's up for renewal this year. But state highway officials say Design Build has been so successful, the legislature should consider making it permanent. Ashton Mara explains.
The Highway Design Build pilot program was passed by the legislature in 2007 and is up for renewal July 1st of this year. Senate Bill 553, when initially taken up by the Senate Transportation and Infrastructure Committee this morning, would have extended the program to 2018.
It allows us to construct projects where we may not have plans on the shelf ready to go. It allows us to get the project up and procured with the contractor and the engineer working together so that you save time and you save money. You don't design it first and then bid it. You work concurrently in getting the project done, and you're allowed to do it in a more constrained time frame.
Maddox says over the life of the program, West Virginia has saved nearly $50 million in the 10 projects completed through Design Build. Senator Robert Plymel of Wayne County questioned Maddox on the continuation of the pilot program.
In your estimation, it's in mine, but I'd just like to know your idea. Should we continue to just call this a pilot or just have it as a program?
My opinion would be have it as a program. I'm a very big fan of Design Build. It doesn't mean we do every job as Design Build. I think we use it where it makes sense to use it. And that would be my recommendation, would be to make it a permanent tool in the toolbox for the Division of Highways used for procurement.
With his answer, Plymel moved to amend the bill, removing any language of the Design Build program being referred to as a pilot project, striking the June 30th, 2018 renewal date, and requiring an annual report from the Division of Highways on completed projects before the Joint Committee on Government Finance by January 15th of each year.
Motion now forces the adoption of the amendment as stated by Senator Plymel to Senate Bill 553. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Ayes appear to have it. I do have it. The motion is adopted.
The amendment was unanimously approved by the committee, and the amended committee substitute of Senate Bill 553 was also passed unanimously. It will now be considered by the Senate Finance Committee. For the Legislature Today, I'm Ashton Mara in the Senate.
Poverty is a persistent problem in West Virginia. In a moment, we'll talk with the co-author of a new study about the issue. First, here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the Senate today. Among the bills introduced in the Senate today, Senate Bill 568 to allow school boards, superintendents, and principals to have the authority to allow certain expelled students the opportunity to return to school through the Juvenile Drug Court. And Senate Bill 570 to clean up existing language in state code regarding elections. Among other things, the bill strikes references to punch card ballots. Up for passage in the Senate tomorrow, Senate Bill 27 to allow police, fire, and emergency service providers to possess naloxone to administer in suspected narcotic drug overdoses. Senate Bill 441 to provide a means for the withdrawal of tax liens that have been filed prematurely, inadvertently, or erroneously. And Senate Bill 477 to provide an electronic voter registration system allowing for greater utilization of the statewide voter registration system. It's interesting that between 1959 and 1979, the poverty rate in West Virginia was cut by more than half, from 35% to 15%. Nationally, the poverty rate dropped from 22% to 12.4%. Child poverty rates also dropped. The positive trend was reversed in the 1980s, and child poverty has grown dramatically ever since. It's estimated that 22% of West Virginia's children live in poverty. This information is contained in a report by the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy and the West Virginia Healthy Kids and Families Coalition entitled Child Poverty in West Virginia, a Growing and Persistent Problem. Joining us tonight is the Executive Director of the Center on Budget and Policy, Ted Boettner. Ted, welcome back. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
The education bill, let's discuss that first. No child can be educated, Senator Unger likes to point out, if he's worried about conditions at home, where the next meal is going to come from, whether he's warm, whether he can sleep. So this education bill, do you think it will address one issue in terms of early childhood development and its pre-K, the governor's pre-K full-time education program for young children?
Yeah, I mean, I think Senator Unger is right on the money when he talks about this, literally. And I think the part of the bill that looks at expanding universal pre-K enrollment to 100%, West Virginia does a pretty good job compared to other states. And if we can include 3-year-olds in that too, we'd be doing even a greater job. And speaking as a parent, I would love the option of sending my kid to school than childcare, which is extremely expensive. So I think that goes a good way at addressing that, but you need to make sure that those programs are quality too, that children are getting the proper care that they deserve, and that they're learning and having those things that can happen when a child is in pre-K.
Right, and that's where hiring and training of teachers comes in, is that you want to have the best teachers you possibly can teaching those young children. And how they are taught early on really has an effect on later in life. So,
yeah, it's the best investment we can possibly make. A lot of scholars, and President Obama actually talked about it in his State of the Union, and Governor Tomlin talked about it too, that for every dollar that we invest returns $7 in quality childhood programs. And this is an investment we can't afford not to make. So when we're looking at the budget, we're looking at being in a tight budget year, but we're looking at other things. We need to weigh those things, and we need to ensure that we have a budget that's fiscally healthy, that we have enough revenue to make these important investments that we know will pay off in the future. I think right now we're not doing that in a lot of ways. So we need to get back to the area where we're bringing in enough revenue to pay for those important programs that benefit so many people in West Virginia. Because when you ask employers, what are the number one thing they look for? They look for a well-educated workforce that can do the job that they want to do. So we need to be making those investments.
Benjamin Franklin actually said, education is the best investment. It pays the best dividend. Yeah, he said that. Your report says poverty costs the state $3.6 billion with a B dollars. How so?
Well, that's because it increases the cost of incarceration, violent offenses that happen. It also lowers productivity and earnings over a life cycle. It also leads to huge health problems. We know there are strong correlations between obesity, diabetes, all types of physical and emotional problems are linked to child poverty. So if we can get children, especially out of poverty, we can increase their earnings over a life cycle. They'll be more likely to vote, less likely to be obese, less likely to have behavioral problems. And these are things that can help our state move forward. These are the investments that we need to make to do that.
How do you define poverty? By what income to income?
Well, I think right now the federal definition is very skewed because it really looks at people that are really scraping to get by. So the federal poverty rate for a family of 4 is about $24,000 a year, and that's pretty hard to get by on that. But we also have what's called the self-sufficiency standard, actually, that Workforce West Virginia put out recently, and it's almost double that. So a family of 4, you're looking at close to $40,000 it takes to meet child care assistance, child care that you pay for, to pay rent, utilities, all of these things that children need. You need about twice the poverty level to do that without any government assistance. So when we're looking at poverty, the people that are in poverty by the federal definition are really poor, and the people near poverty are barely scraping to get by. And sometimes our programs don't help enough where people there begins to be a cliff effect where they're deciding, well, I don't want to see an increase in my pay because then I'll lose child care assistance or I'll lose benefits to SNAP. So that's why it's so important that we create programs that create that bridge. One of them that does that is the federal earned income tax credit. And that's something 24 other states have their own state earned income tax credit. We've been pushing that policy for years, and that's one of the things that we can do to directly decrease child poverty. So if we had a EITC, a state one, just like the federal one, which brings in about $325 million, if we just had one as a percentage of the federal, let's say 20%, that would allow thousands of West Virginia families to get out of poverty. Just that simple.
What about welfare, aid to needy families, food stamps? The federal government puts a lot of money into poverty, anti-poverty programs like this. Are they not working?
Absolutely, they're working. When we talk about those federal poverty rates like the EITC, what's not included in those is the EITC, the child care tax credit. We've actually made some advancements since the 80s, but there's been a big shift over the last 35 years. Wages have stagnated or declined for a majority of workers in the state. So now you have to have two parents working. That requires child care. Health care costs have soared over the last 35 years. It costs more to do these things. It's taking a bigger chunk of your paycheck to do that. So people are struggling, and those investments that we were making in the mainly in the 60s and in the 70s, we stopped doing that. And that's why when you talked about senior poverty declining so dramatically, that was because of mostly Social Security. And we decided to make those investments as a society, and guess what? It paid off.
Because we have fewer seniors in poverty now.
Yeah, about 40% of seniors in West Virginia were in poverty in 1969, now close to 10%. And what that shows is that we can do something. This isn't something that's sort of a dream of ours, it's a dream of everybody's, but we know that we can do it. It has been done for seniors, and all it's going to take is a lot of people coming together and pushing an agenda that can reduce poverty in West Virginia.
And even 10% is pretty high for seniors. It's too high.
Yeah, it's too high. A lot of seniors, about a third just live on Social Security alone.
There was a war on poverty declared almost 40 years ago. Did we lose the war?
We stopped fighting the war in a lot of ways. I think there was a big shift, in the way the role of government in addressing these things happened in the late 70s and 80s, and we have seen some progress, like the federal EITC, but
What's
we have the earned income tax credit.
All right, yes.
And the child care tax credit have been advancements towards those ends, but it hasn't been enough to make up for that really sluggish economic growth over the last 35 years. We saw some boom in the 90s, but when we were all coming together, working together in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and people's incomes were growing along with the higher income people were doing just as good as the middle class, we saw advances out of poverty. And the same thing in West Virginia. The poverty rate, like you said, was about 15% in 1980. And then the huge recession came in the early 1980s in West Virginia, and it pushed a lot of people into poverty. But we can do these things. States can be proactive in this, and states can also give a little nudge to the federal government to do something, just like we're doing with universal pre-K.
Your report takes kind of a three-pronged approach of the effective response in dealing with children in poverty. What are they?
Well, I think the one thing is to make sure that we maximize the resources that we have today. Looking at improving the child's family with what we have today. And the other thing is to look at what new programs that exist in other states or that we create that can deal with the problems uniquely to West Virginia. And another idea is also to look at specifically what policies that we can pursue. So there's, it's a three-prong approach, but there's other ways that we can, address child poverty, but those answers are going to have to come from the community. That's why it's so important that this campaign to end child poverty that's been going on and having forums, there's one tonight in Charleston, all around the state, is to get the input from the people on the ground. Because you can have a wonk up like me up here talking about data and numbers and we should do this, but we need to hear from the people that are really being affected here. The single mothers who are struggling to get by and the children that they're trying to raise. Half of single mothers in West Virginia are below the federal poverty line, half.
Conservatives in the legislature would sit here and say, well, look, if we just cut business taxes, more businesses would be attracted to West Virginia. The businesses that are here would hire more people. The businesses that come will hire lots of people. So why not just do that? Just take the taxes away, and there'll be plenty of jobs, the economy will grow, and poverty can be erased.
Well, empirically, it doesn't add up. There's very little evidence that that is the way to broadly shared economic growth. And we have a test case. We did this in 2006 and 2007. We've lowered the corporate net income tax rate. We've almost gotten completely rid of the business franchise tax. And how are we doing? Poverty has gone up during that same period of time. And what we need is a real approach that invests in this state, makes the state a better quality place to live, work, and raise a family, and we're not doing that. And that requires coming together to solve some of these problems and to making this place not a cheap place to do business, but a good place to do business. And I think that's a real important thing. And those tax cuts are costing us dearly. $200 million a year is the full impact of those tax cuts on the business franchise tax and corporate income tax, and that's why we've had to cut the budget.
That's right. And then the food tax was cut because everybody wanted the food tax cut.
But workers know that you can't get anything for free, right? If you want something, you have to pay for it. The thing is, we never paid for those tax cuts, whether they're good, bad, whether you liked them. We have to do that in order to make these important investments.
The Center on Budget and Policy did an analysis of Governor Tomlin's budget, noting the state will be hurting from declining revenues. The governor announced today a hiring freeze until June 30th. He could expand it or he could rescind it, but a hiring freeze. You saw this coming.
Yeah, I don't want to play Cassandra here, but I was actually looking at a report we did, one of our first reports looking at the business tax cuts and arguing the same thing. Down the road, you're going to face a decision where you're going to have to cut services. Like right now, we're cutting domestic violence. We're cutting higher education by about $48 million. And these things were foreseen. You can't cut your tax base and expect suddenly this trickle-down economics to work, because it doesn't work. What we saw is declining revenue, and we're not the federal government. We can't print money and put money out there. We have to exist on the revenue that's taken in to the Department of Treasury.
And lottery revenues are down. You know, severance isn't bringing in as much as it did. So they cut all these taxes, and I suppose they knew there was going to be pressure on the lottery. They knew other states were going to get into the casino business, but still, this is where we are today with that budget because of that.
Yeah, and we also have a really big healthy rainy day fund with about $1 billion in it. So these are all policy choices. We've decided to build up that rainy day fund instead of investing in these things that we're all talking about, like universal pre-K, like a quality child care rating system, something that we need very much, all of these things.
Ted Boettner, Executive Director of the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy. Good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the House today. Among the bills introduced in the House today, House Bill 2961 to create the Compassionate Medical Marijuana Use Act of 2013 in order to protect patients with debilitating medical conditions, as well as their practitioners and providers, from arrest and prosecution if such patients engage in the medical use of marijuana. House Bill 2966, prohibiting an employer from requesting or requiring that an employee or applicant disclose any username, password, or other means for accessing a personal account or service through certain electronic communications devices, and prohibiting an employer from taking or threatening to take certain disciplinary actions for an employee's refusal to disclose certain password and related information. House Bill 2967 to prohibit the publication of identities of persons who have been issued licenses to carry a concealed deadly weapon. House Bill 2961 to provide that historical reenactors are not violating the provision of the state code having to do with unlawful military organizations, and that it is not a violation for a group of individuals to associate as a group of historians reenacting a military company to drill or parade with arms. And House Bill 2987 to require opioid treatment programs to report and provide statistics to the legislature. On second reading in the House tomorrow, House Bill 2780 to require multidisciplinary teams be convened quarterly to discuss children in the custody of the Division of Juvenile Services. And House Bill 2842 to clarify that time-sharing plans, accommodations, and facilities are subject to regulation by the Division of Land Sales and Condominiums in the state's Auditor's Office. This has been the Legislature Today. Tomorrow, our discussion about children in poverty continues with Dr. Patricia Cusimo, President and CEO of the Education Alliance. We welcome your comments and questions about the issues at this legislative session. You can email us at feedback@wvpubcast.org. And full episodes of the Legislature Today are available on our website. I'm Beth Voorhees. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
Support for the Legislature Today has been provided by the following. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont. Online at wvhtf.org. Connecting West Virginia families and businesses through high-speed internet services. Learn more about connecting at frontier.com.